time, that teenager was on an ankle monitor and under the supervision of the Department of Juvenile Services for an attempted murder that left the victim paralyzed. He recently transferred from Anne Arundel County Schools, and Howard County's superintendent told us he was left in the dark about the student's past and would never have allowed him to attend classes in person at Howard High had he known.
When the student transferred to our district, there was a gap. We had no record, and we're unable to get information from the Department of Juvenile Services.
Those lapses in communication can really cause significant risk and harm. We saw that in this instance.
Senator Clarence Lamb wrote this letter to the state superintendent demanding the change.
But we want to make sure that this never happens again. And so we're trying to respond with as much urgency to parents and student concerns as possible.
But there's still work to do. The emergency notifications do not affect students transferring into public schools from private schools, independent programs, or out-of-state schools.
If you have a student who moves from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction, there needs to be a way for the new jurisdiction to be able to be notified about that. So we plan on working with all of our partners to ensure that that loophole gets closed, because I'm very frustrated by what we saw in that situation.
And we are talking about serious crimes, including murder, attempted murder, arson, sexual assault. That information would be shared confidentially only among superintendents and top school security officials.
All right. Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
So you guys heard that there from the local CBS up in Baltimore. This is the first of its kind to ever be introduced. So this is like emergency approved. And I think this is very precedent setting for students all around this country, as we were talking about in headlines, with violent crime actually being up, as reported by the FBI. We can't forget the minors who were involved. And honestly, here in DC and of course in big cities like Baltimore, it is way up among youth.
Oh, in New York City, that if you are mugged, it's probably going to be someone who's in middle school or high school age. Almost. I mean, like I learned after a while, after moving to New York City, it was a bad idea if you were like, you wanted to hop on the subway at like 2:45, school lets out at 3. Might be a good idea to hit Starbucks for an hour, let the kids get home from school, then get on the subway.
Wow. Well, so to talk more about that, let's bring in our guest today. That right there is Jovani Patterson. Jovani Patterson is a West Baltimore resident, education activist, and chair of People for Elected Accountability and Civic Engagement, or PEACE Baltimore. So he's been on with Ted and I before, and with Jamarl as well on our previous show on the old radio station that is unfortunately gone bye-bye. And he's excellent on this topic. So Jovani, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Hi, Jovani. You sound great.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, good morning. Thank
so
you for having me back.
We just heard that report. First of all, you live in Maryland, so I don't know if you have kids, but this impacts where you live first and foremost. But I think this is going to be precedent setting for schools all around the country. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I do agree with your assessment there that it could be precedent setting, but this isn't something that's abnormal or unusual. If you know, like I have sued Baltimore City Public Schools mainly for grade changing and truancy, but in that effort, you hear from a lot of parents or just educators and people in general on why kids aren't being able to learn, and a lot of that is because they feel unsafe in the classroom. And why are they feeling unsafe? It's because generally a lot of the other students, there's kind of like these soft on crime or soft on punishment activities that take place in these schools, in this school system. So these kids feel unsafe and they're unable to learn and unable to grow and develop. And they also take matters into their own hands. So this being now caught and being, revealed, it does shine light on the issue, but it's kind of like this isn't the first time something like this, has occurred.
Yeah, I'm of two minds of this. I think first and foremost, I think that it's good that the school system, at least in one state, is trying to close this loophole. But there are still loopholes within the loopholes, because this only applies to kids at public school. There's no, they can't quite make this applicable to private schools or kids from other states. So this is only for kids at public schools in Maryland transferring from one to the other that have a violent criminal history. And sure, I think, like I said, I'm kind of torn, because there are going to be some kids who are reformed, right, and trying to live the straight and narrow, and then they're moving, maybe they go live with a relative somewhere else, and they're trying to clean up their act, and that's why they've transferred to a different school. And part of my fear is that those kids who are trying to better their lives and start over and leave behind that ugly past of theirs, by telling the new school that this might taint the well for them, that this could potentially influence how teachers or administrators are going to treat these kids. And it could potentially, there are no secrets. It's 2024. Eventually somebody hears about, oh, you hear about that new transfer kid? He was locked up when he was 12 for, shanking somebody at whatever, Anne Arundel County schools. But isn't there something there that's kind of dangerous for those kids? Because I feel like with the kids, we got to hope that they have a chance to do better if they move out of those bad situations.
Well, I mean, there's always hope for people to change, but you also still have to consider, the victims, and also, the people that, or parents that are sending their kids to these schools, that may be around someone they feel uncomfortable with. Look, I don't, claim to have the solutions to everything, but honesty is always the best policy, and transparency is always the best policy. So at least giving people the option and the choice, right, to help make a decision that's better for them, in my opinion, is the best way to go. Not hiding something into the dark and hoping something happens doesn't happen to your family, relative, or student, and God forbid your child. You just don't want to take those risks. And I understand there's certain stigmas and things like that. But there are consequences for bad choices, and we can't go around that. There are just consequences for bad choices. But again, I do believe people can change. I do believe people should have the opportunity to change. But we cannot hide that from people, and be in the dark about it.
Ted, you're muted.
Today's
There you go.
the day of mute, accidental muting. Jovani, I'm kind of wondering about sort of the disconnect between the fact that this person is not incarcerated, is not in a halfway home, is out on the street, in school, but they're safe enough to release in the minds of the juvenile justice system, but at the same time, it reminds me a little bit of Megan's Law, right? Like someone who's a registered sex offender, we decided to let them walk around free in society, but we're going to put a scarlet A on them and say, okay, well, watch out for this person, right? I just sort of think, if they're that dangerous, why are they even in any school?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, in Maryland, we have probably one of the most progressive, I forgot what his title is, but his name is Vincent Schiraldi. But essentially, he's over the criminal justice, system in Maryland, and he's one of the most progressive, people out there. And he has a history and track record in New York. But our mayor here in Maryland, not mayor, but governor here in Maryland, picked him as the best person for this job. And if you look at some of his policies, it is kind of, you don't believe that someone who's taken the rights of another citizen, for example, taking a life, and major property and violent crime violations, those type of things. He doesn't believe that those people should have their rights taken away, and being incarcerated and instead should be let back into the streets. So I do think this does speak to a larger issue with the criminal justice system here in Maryland of letting more dangerous people and more with serious crimes and serious convictions back out onto the street. Again, the hope is that they can change, but your neighborhoods, your communities, your schools, your education, your future, all of that is being put in jeopardy for these science experiments of human behavior.
Yeah, let's not forget that with these kids, that especially if we're talking about like the Baltimore area, that it disproportionately impacts children of color. And there's a component there that, for both the kid going to the new school and the kids that are already at the new school, that there can be some sort of tension that's created. There could be danger from both sides. And I just wonder, with as quickly as they moved through this just yesterday, I mean, they literally took emergency action to make this a new law. I think Governor 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 Westmore is I'm so used to saying Hogan, that they're gonna sign this immediately, and it's now a thing. And they haven't really taken the time, as you normally would before a governor signs something into law, to actually put in the studies and see what the ramifications really are. But wouldn't there's got to be some sort of fallout, because, as we said, it's going to disproportionately impact children of color, and these are minors, these are kids.
Well, I asked from what position are you saying it disproportionately affects children of color?
Well, I mean, like, I'm just using the Baltimore because they're showing Baltimore on the screen, is that because the community is primarily children of color, that when these kids transfer schools or whatever, that maybe they find out that this kid is from a rival gang and it just creates a whole new turbulent place for them, where the kids, one way or the other, don't have the anonymity anymore. I know they say it's going to be, kept, private details of the kid among the school officials, but I don't believe that. I just feel like there's not enough impact.
Well, there's a risk.
Studies. There's a risk.
Well, look, again, I go back to my work with dealing with this lawsuit and talking to parents and really focus mainly on Baltimore City. But one of the biggest hurdles for children learning is bullying and being, those type of things that are going on in the classroom. Now, what is in general the response to bullying? These kids are not allowed to be removed from the class. These kids are effectively, there's this restorative justice practice where they have to be made whole back into the community. That's directly from the restorative justice handbook. But what that's doing is taking away class time, taking away instruction time for these disruptive students, in which there's no consequence, right? So what we're looking at is a continual, push for no consequences for violent behavior, and that even further disproportionately affects students of color, and students in many of these schools, because you're taking valuable instruction time away from learning, and now not even punishing or providing discipline for those students. And then what happens? A lot of kids now are taking matters into their own hands. That's why now they're installing metal detectors and things like that, because there's no consequences. So you're now pushing even younger kids into more violent and abusive behavior, because they're not getting the protection from bullies and these violent people that they deserve. So
real quick, I got something to tag on to this, and it just makes me think of sorry to interrupt, but like, we hear often of cases of like cops that have done bad stuff in one state, they move to a new state, and they get a new job as a cop there, and there is no system in place to notify the new state, the new employer, wherever they go, that cop was fired because he assaulted people, perps, right? Or he shot somebody, or what. There's no system in place. So when you look at it in that perspective, you kind of have to go, okay, well, this is a good step in the right direction, despite the possible
Well,
repercussions.
I'm worried about, like, let's just say the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. I mean, I think Manila and I are, we're cynics. We know government and school always do what they're supposed to do, and organizations aren't always highly functional, right? But let's just say everything goes well, and that a new, school kid from school A does something bad, gets entangled in the juvenile justice system. Under Maryland law, school A notifies school B keeps everything confidential. What is school B really supposed to do with that information? I mean, are they going to, have the track coach follow the kid around, all day long to make sure they don't do anything wrong? I mean, it's sort of like, okay, so, you can have knowledge, but what do you do with it? I mean, I'm genuinely curious. I mean, the kid, ultimately, he's a kid. This is a he. I'm assuming it's a he, but that's not true, right?
It's a he. I think
usually
it's a he.
But usually, but not always. But the point is, a person is a student in a new high school. They have a record. So how does that impact their experience in class or in extracurricular activities or anything else?
Well, look, I do think honesty again is the best policy. I remember getting this email from a school that I was sending my child to. It was about a teacher, and didn't necessarily mention which teacher it was, but it said that the teacher has not received a particular certification, but we feel that they were kind of still eligible to teach a class XYZ. But I think that right there at least provides some level of transparency, saying, hey, there is a student in the 10th grade that has received some serious prior convictions. We believe, we build a community around of solid, parents that help restore this person back, to, you can use their words, restore them back into the community, what have you. But I do think, again, honesty is the best policy. I don't believe keeping people in the dark really benefits anyone.
Yeah, this is, I mean, I'm because this happened with such a fast, ferocious speed. Like I did not see this coming, and I've never really thought about it until recent years, because my son's only in kindergarten, and already the difference between preschool and kindergarten, how the kids, like you said, with bullying and what have you, and there's just, and we're in Virginia, right? We're in Northern Virginia, and just as a new-ish parent, because my kid is little, I'm already forward thinking, right? So when this news broke, I thought, wow, this is the kind of stuff I have to think about as a parent sending a kid to public school, that he might be surrounded by a kid here and there.
Absolutely. Or a kid
convicted criminal.
But it could also be a kid where they have no prior offense and then they do something wrong. Everybody's got a first time, right? I mean, are you worried at all, Jovani, about what might happen in terms of over policing or over monitoring? I was in court one time waiting for an unrelated case, and before me, there was someone who was a parole violator in New York City. They were a resident of the Bronx, and they had been told as a condition of their parole not to leave the Bronx. The guy had walked out into the middle of the Harlem River that separates the Bronx from Upper Manhattan and fished off the middle of that bridge. He was 10 feet technically inside the borough of Manhattan. He was arrested and facing years in prison as a result of a parole violation. For obviously, I mean, okay, he shouldn't have done that, obviously, but I mean, it was a dumb move. But I mean, come on, this is if there was ever a place for a liberal judge, it's here. Hey, stupid, don't do that again, right? Stay in the Bronx. Don't even go into the middle of the river. I mean, these are kids, 17, 16 years old. Aren't you worried are you worried that there might be kind of we got to be a forgiving society. We've got to understand that many violent offenders never reoffend,
But I mean, let's look at this too, right? I am one that I'm happy to give second chances, and that's part of the world that we live in. you have to be able to work with anyone regardless of their background. And I believe that. However, let's look at some of these prior convictions. I mean, this kid was convicted of murder. Do you know what it takes to murder?
Well, why is he out?
Right. This is my point. Right.
Right.
This is what you don't have to be a rocket scientist or highly educated to know that it is morally wrong to kill someone.
Although studies have shown that kids don't really, their cerebral cortex isn't fully formed until you're 25.
I
right?
don't buy that, and that's kind of the thinking of the current of Vincent Schiraldi. You know right from wrong. When you're 3 years old, you know when you tell that first lie, and you know it's wrong. So taking another human life at whatever age, now you may be desensitized to it, and there is a level of that, but you know it's wrong.
Well, not at every age, right? I mean, there's been studies of like very young
certainly in high
murderers.
school,
But there's child murderers who are like 12 who literally were arrested for killing their own parents and then said, "Oh, can I go now? My mom and dad are waiting for me at home."
So it takes a long time to get there. So you have to understand, like, killing someone is not I can't fathom taking another life. And you have to understand, this is not an easy thing to do. So whatever worked that kid up to that point, there's some serious issues there to do that. And that needs some serious help, but you're not going to get that help from the standard classroom, putting kids back into a quote unquote normal environment. An abnormal circumstance calls for abnormal, intervention.
Yeah. What about this kid? I mean, obviously the story just broke yesterday, so we don't know all the details yet, but who are the parents of children like this? Why this kid obviously is now a repeat offender because he's in trouble. He had an ankle monitor on and he showed up to school with a ghost gun. Where are the parents? Where are the families involved with this kid's life? And where is any sort of like rehabilitation program? If this kid is a violent criminal, we've brought up the question already. Why is he in the general population at school? Why is he not at a special program?
Or at all? I don't want him at my grocery store,
Again, I mean, these are all valid questions.
We're the grown-ups.
Yeah, I mean, these are all valid questions that I think, should be addressed, right? And I think I think the mindset is just putting people back with other people. They'll kind of assimilate and maybe get their life together. But we do have to ask, where are some of these fundamental elements that are required for, stable society? I am a big proponent of family. I am a big proponent of, fatherhood and bringing community back. And we do have to ask those questions, like where, what's going on at home in the family life. But I don't think it's up to the schools to be responsible for the rehabilitation process, especially for offenders like this.
Yeah, it's such a messy place when you're talking about kids, and the best we can do is I agree with you. We cannot leave it up to the federal system or the municipal system to raise our children. It is our children. It is our communities. And I forget what the governor says. I'm looking at his mom or his dad or his grandma, his aunties. Why have they not taken control of this kid? Because it starts at home. So, I mean, I think you're right. So
I'll also ask the question, like, how can the community help if the community doesn't know either?
Solid point.
There is that. although, this is an exaggerated version of that thing, when you are not getting along well in your junior high school and then you get a fresh start when you go to high school. A fresh start is a very valuable thing. Jovani, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys for having me. Reach out to me anytime. I'm glad to help.
Will do. Jovani Patterson.
So glad to have you.
Jovani
on.
Patterson is the voice you just heard and saw. He's a West Baltimore resident, education activist, and chair of PEACE. That's the acronym for People for Elected Accountability and Civic Engagement. In his 2020 run for city council president, Patterson got over 42,000 votes. That's the largest number of votes ever garnered by a Republican. You can find out more about Jovani at jovanipatterson.com.
Yeah, that was great conversation. And I think we're going to see more of that. And maybe it's a good thing, Ted. I don't know. I mean, I think so. I think maybe.
Well,
that's
I mean,
reaction.
Jovani didn't really give a direct answer to my question, which still is kind of what is the school really supposed to do with this information when they get it? Okay, so you now know that
so they know
a person with a criminal record is here, a violent person. Well, what are you supposed to do with it? I mean, you're supposed to notify every, like their English teacher, like, look.